Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Dana Ireland. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Dana Marie Ireland was born on December 12, 1968, in Fairfax County, Virginia. Her parents, John and Mary, also had another daughter, Sandy, who was 14 years older than Dana. At some point, Sandy moved to Hawaii. In the spring of 1991, Dana graduated from college with a degree in physical education. On October 15, 1991, Dana traveled from Virginia to Kapaho, Hawaii, which is on the Big Island. She lived with her older sister Sandy and Sandy's boyfriend. On December 10, 1991, Dana's parents traveled to Hawaii to visit their daughters. They rented a house in a Kapaho neighborhood called Vacation Land, and Dana moved into this house. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On December 24, 1991, Christmas Eve, Dana rode a bicycle 7 miles to a friend's house to invite them to a family Christmas dinner. She made it to the friend's house, then departed for her return trip to her parents' rental house at about 4:10 p.m. Dana never made it to the house. Just before 5:30 p.m., the police were notified after someone found Dana's bicycle in vegetation by the side of Kapaho Kai Drive. At 5:47 p.m., the police were contacted again, this time about an injured woman who was found on a fishing trail in Wa'a. This is 5 miles away from where Dana's bike was found. About an hour earlier, a local resident named Ida Smith heard an engine running, then a woman screaming. When Ida investigated, she found Dana Ireland with her clothing torn off and covered in blood. Ida did not have access to a phone, therefore she signaled passing cars to get help. This is why it took so long to contact the authorities. An ambulance didn't get there until almost 7 p.m., in part because public safety dispatchers gave the first responders unclear directions to the area. Dana was transported to the Hilo Medical Center. She underwent emergency surgery for multiple traumatic injuries. At 12:25 a.m., now on December 25, 1991, Christmas Day, Dana Ireland died. She was 23 years old. Here is what the police found during the course of their investigation. The black mountain bike that Dana had been riding looked like it had been struck by a motor vehicle. There was a gouge mark in the road which appeared to be from a vehicle accelerating near her bicycle. The police believe that Dana had been rammed by a vehicle, then taken to where she was discovered. Here the perpetrator continued the attack and left Dana to die. During the investigation, DNA was recovered from Dana's body and a t-shirt found at the scene. With the technology available at that time, not a lot could be determined from the DNA, but of course that would change significantly in the future. The police started questioning people in the area, looking for any clues about who killed Dana, but there wasn't much to go on. On March 17, 1992, the police received a tip about a well-known troublemaker named Frank Pauline. He denied involvement in the murder, but said he had overheard someone accusing a man named Albert Schweitzer, who went by his middle name, Ian. The police spoke to Ian and Ian's brother, Sean. They knew Frank, but didn't spend time with him. They did not know why Frank mentioned Ian's name. In February 1993, the police questioned Frank in connection with a burglary. They asked him about Dana's murder, but he continued to deny involvement. In July 1993, Frank was arrested for an unrelated assault of a sexual nature. In 1994, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for that offense. While Frank was in prison, Frank's half-brother, John Gonsalves, came forward and claimed that Frank knew who killed Dana. John was facing unrelated drug charges and may have been trying to find favor. Suddenly, Frank changed his story and said he knew what happened to Dana after all. Here is the story that Frank supplied to the police. Frank said that on the day of Dana's murder, Ian and Sean Schweitzer had stopped by his house in the early afternoon. The men asked if he wanted to go out and party. Frank understood this to mean they would be using cocaine. He agreed, and the men left in Ian's purple 1957 Volkswagen Beetle. Ian was driving, his brother Sean was in the passenger seat, and Frank was in the back seat. The men stopped several times to use cocaine. As they approached Kapaho, they saw Dana standing on the side of the road. Frank claimed that Ian made an impolite comment toward Dana, using a word that rhymes with row. Ian then turned the vehicle around and slammed into Dana at about 40 miles per hour. He backed over her and stopped the vehicle. The brothers exited the Volkswagen, picked Dana up, and put her into the car's trunk. On a Volkswagen Beetle, the trunk is located in the front. When they reached Waa Waa, Ian conducted an assault of a sexual nature against Dana. Ian then told Frank they needed to kill Dana because she could identify them. Frank walked to the back of the vehicle, retrieved a tire iron, approached Dana, and fatally struck her. Over the next 2 years, Frank continued to talk to the police and changed details in his story a few times. For example, in April 1995, he claimed his brother was the perpetrator. In July 1996, Frank recanted his confession. He said that he had no idea who was responsible. Everybody he mentioned before, including his brother and the Schweitzer brothers, had been falsely accused. Despite Frank changing his story, he was indicted for murder in July 1997. In October 1997, Ian and Sean Schweitzer were arrested and indicted for murder. In October 1998, the charges against the Schweitzer brothers were dismissed because semen recovered from the victim did not match any of the three men. Even though Frank was excluded, the charges against him were not dismissed, probably because of the confession part. In May 1999, Ian and Sean were re-indicted based on statements made by a jailhouse informant named Michael Ortiz, who claimed that Ian confessed to him when they were incarcerated together. In August 2000, Frank Pauline was convicted of second-degree murder and other charges. His sentence was 3 terms of life in prison. In February 2000, Ian Schweitzer was convicted of second-degree murder and other charges. His sentence was life in prison plus 40 years. In April 2000, Sean Schweitzer pleaded guilty to kidnapping and manslaughter and received 1 year in jail. But with time served, he was immediately released. He only took the deal so he would be able to get out of prison. On April 27, 2015, the day Frank Pauline turned 42 years old, he received an unwelcome birthday gift while in a New Mexico prison. It was a rock to the back of the head. Frank did not survive the high-velocity gift delivery. If Frank's birthday wish was to have somebody rock his world, then his wish was granted. Due to advances in DNA technology, the police learned that the DNA from the crime scene came from an unknown male. The unknown male was not any of the 3 people convicted for the murder. In January 2023, Ian Schweitzer's convictions were vacated. In October of that same year, Sean Schweitzer's convictions were vacated as well. An attorney was working to vacate Frank's convictions, although with Frank being dead, I doubt he will care too much. In 2024, using genetic genealogy, the police in Hawaii County identified a potential match for the DNA, a 57-year-old fisherman named Albert Loro. At the time of the murder, he lived within 2 miles of the fishing trail where Dana Ireland was found. The police obtained his DNA and determined it was a match. The police questioned Albert and let him go. They didn't feel as though they had enough to charge him with murder, and the statute of limitations had expired for any other possible charges. 4 days later, Albert was found dead in his home. He had brought an end to his own life. Now moving to my analysis. At this point, there is little doubt that Albert Loro killed Dana Ireland, and he worked alone. Frank, Ian, and Sean were not involved in the murder. This case has caused a massive amount of outrage at the state of Hawaii. People want the prosecutors involved to be held accountable for convicting 3 innocent men. They argue that it was clear this prosecution was reckless. Any reasonable prosecutor would have known there was a substantial risk the wrong men had been put on trial. The state, of course, disagrees. They deny any wrongdoing and maintain they had enough evidence to move forward. This brings me to the question, should the prosecution be held accountable for the false convictions in this case? Was this reckless, or were the mistakes made understandable under the circumstances? To answer this question, we need to examine the evidence both for and against the idea that Frank, Ian, and Sean were guilty of Dana's murder. I will only use the evidence that was available in the year 2000 when the men were prosecuted. We now know the men were not guilty, but it's necessary to examine the case from the perspective of the state using only the information the state had available. This way, it is possible to determine if the decision to prosecute was reasonable. Let's start by examining the inculpatory factors. Frank confessed to being involved in Dana's murder and implicated both Ian and Sean. Frank's half-brother, John Gonsalves, said that he saw Ian and Sean arrive at a Christmas Eve party driving a Volkswagen Beetle. The front of the vehicle had sustained damage. A jailhouse informant named Michael Ortiz said that Ian confessed to the murder. In March 1992, the Volkswagen was painted yellow and the fenders were cut off. This makes it seem like somebody was trying to hide the vehicle and conceal evidence of a collision. Moving to the exculpatory factors, semen found on the victim's body did not match Frank, Ian, or Sean. The state claimed there must have been a fourth man involved, but they had no credible evidence to support this theory. If there was a fourth man, why didn't Frank mention this in his confession? As far as the testimony of Michael Ortiz, jailhouse informants are incredibly unreliable and should never be used for any purpose whatsoever. This was not a secret even back in the year 2000. Frank's confession was suspicious from the very beginning. After he made his confession, he changed his story several times, even falsely accusing his brother at one point. Frank said a Volkswagen Beetle was involved, but at other times he said it was a blue pickup truck. Frank did not know when the men first saw Dana. He did not know where she was when she was struck by the vehicle, and he changed the roles that each of the men played during the crime. Frank was well known to law enforcement. He was described as a liar, thief, a spoiled little brat, a cocaine addict, and a walking crime wave. The prosecution knew that Frank could not be trusted at all. Frank's half-brother, John Gonsalves, was facing serious drug charges when he came forward with information about Frank. He received favorable treatment for his cooperation. Furthermore, John's family had a long-standing feud with the Schweitzer family. Ian Schweitzer did not purchase the Volkswagen Beetle until the end of January 1992, a month after Dana Ireland was killed. An expert said the Volkswagen did not produce the tire tracks found near the collision. The killer transported Dana from the collision site to the fishing trail. A Volkswagen Beetle would have experienced significant difficulty making it down to where Dana was found due to the terrible condition of the road. There were giant potholes in it. Even the ambulance crew would not drive down to where she was out of fear of getting stuck. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I believe the prosecution should be held accountable for falsely convicting Frank, Ian, and Sean? In my opinion, yes. Any reasonable prosecutor would have known not to move forward with this case. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Albert Lauro murdered Dana Ireland on an impulse. He saw her riding her bicycle and rammed into her. He had no criminal history other than a 1987 arrest for shoplifting. Albert wasn't on the radar of law enforcement. The only way he could have been identified was through DNA analysis, but that technology was unsophisticated in 1991. Amazingly, after committing the murder, Albert managed to stay out of trouble for the rest of his life. He never did anything that put the spotlight on him. The state felt a tremendous amount of pressure to solve the crime. For instance, in 1994, Dana's parents moved to Hawaii. They pushed this idea that multiple perpetrators were responsible, maybe as many as 4. And they collected thousands of signatures on a petition to pressure the state to make an arrest. The state was overjoyed when Frank Pauline confessed. He was a disorganized criminal who was clearly trying to assist his half-brother, but the state didn't care. They were happy to take him at his word. Frank was unconcerned with how many lives he destroyed, so he dragged the Schweitzers into his story. Now moving to my final thoughts. This is one of the most frightening wrongful conviction cases that I've seen in a long time. It demonstrates how, if the state wants a conviction, they don't need a lot of evidence. In this case, the state demonstrated unimaginable gullibility when they were easily manipulated by a career criminal. They had faith in a mysterious fourth man in order to justify the false prosecution. Prosecutors gave into their desperation to hold someone accountable. Really, anyone would do. The state was reckless and irresponsible. I find it curious that the state does not have the same resolve to hold themselves accountable for the wrongdoing. All of a sudden, justice doesn't seem so desirable. Those are my thoughts on the case of Dana Ireland. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.